Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to TASA Thursday's webinar, and my name's Roger Wilkinson. I'm the Digital Publications Editor for TASA, and I'd like to welcome you today. First of all, I'll just do the acknowledgement. So TASA acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of this land. TASA recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pays respect to elders past, present and emerging. And today we have four speakers. First of all, Adele Pavlidis, Ramon Spaaij, Karen Block and Maia. Sorry, I don't know Maia's last name. Maia's coming to us from industry. Today's topic is sport, community and social inclusion. And I believe that Adele is going to lead off. So I will pass it over to you, Adele. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm on the Yamambere language people's lands up here in southeast Queensland, and pay my respects to elders past, present, future, and any Indigenous people here today. First, I'm just going to introduce the Sociology of Sport and Leisure thematic group. So I co-lead this group with Professor Ramon Spaaij, who's here today, and also Graham Lee, who is a PhD candidate at UQ. We have a really exciting group of PhD candidates, ECRs, and mid-career and experienced scholars part of the group. And we're trying to continue to promote our discipline, particularly with all the mega sport events we have in the coming 10 years. What is it? The Green and Gold Runway. We have a LinkedIn group that people can join. And these groups are only as good as people contributing to them. So I'm going to put the link in the chat there for anyone who would like to join. We are also in the process of developing a bit of a casual mentoring program. So we have people who have volunteered to be a mentor and people who have reached out and said they'd like some mentoring. So we will be connecting you soon if you're one of those people. Otherwise, it's not too late if you are interested to get in touch. We provide opportunities to promote and share your work. And also we have opportunities for sport organisations and industry to connect with researchers working in this space. And we also help organise the sport and leisure panels at the annual TASA conference. I also wanted to point out that TASA is very reasonably priced and has a sliding scale depending on your income. So please do have a look at that, because for students and people on low incomes, it's really quite reasonable, particularly compared with other professional organisations. And we would love to have you at our in our thematic group and contributing. So that is about our thematic group, and always reach out if you have any questions or ideas that you'd like us to do. We are open and very relaxed. We just want to continue to generate and support people to do research in these areas and promote sociology as really actually very important to sport and leisure. So next slide. Thanks, Karen. I just have one slide here. So for those that don't know me, my name is Dr. Adele Pavlidis. I am an interdisciplinary sports sociologist, and I'm also the research seminar series convener for SAGE at Griffith. SAGE is a research hub focused on sport and gender equity at Griffith. And I bring that up because, there's so much really wonderful work within interdisciplinary and social science and humanities fields that are trying to make a difference in terms of inclusion and diversity in sport. As we know, the majority of funding often goes to sports science or sports psychology and these other areas. But more and more people are realizing that it's not, that we do need transformative approaches, and sociology is excellent in that way. So in terms of my own work around community inclusion, I guess one of the key points of difference that I bring is a focus on understanding gendered power relations and bringing innovative methods and theories to try and understand these nuances of power. So that's stuff that you can't necessarily see, the silences that are there, both the material and the immaterial. So it might be emotions, but it could be policies, it could be sports fields, it could be equipment. So thinking about the diversity of elements that come together in sport and how they relate. Power is a central concept, as you know, we talk about government, and often when we think of power, we think of, you know, the authority, the governing body wielding power over its subjects. Instead, from my perspective, I think of power as relational, contingent, and embodied. So within community sport, my research has shown that even in the most inclusive environments, so I studied roller derby for my PhD, but I also am involved in other community sports, roller skating and field hockey. So even within these sports that position themselves as inclusive, there are hierarchies and what Deleuze and Guattari calls micro-fascisms. So I'm really interested in understanding the effective dimensions of power and how we can work with these to open up these spaces, to have a dialogue. So I'm going to give just two examples because we have a short time period in my own work in the past decade. So the first example was my research in roller derby. Now, in roller derby, there was a real emphasis, and still is, I do keep up to date with people playing roller derby and governance of roller derby. So there's an emphasis on love and passion, you know. This was expressed via ways of dressing, commitment to derby as a way of life, and a strong sense of belonging for some participants. There's a real strong identity connected to roller derby. Yet at times, this love and passion were effects that created boundaries and exclusion. Sarah Ahmed writes about the ways love has been and continues to be used in, say, white supremacy groups as a way to talk about the reason for their hate. So thinking about love and passion as not always positive, that maybe we have to have a more open approach to some of these affects. It's not about who loves it the most, who's showing the most, you know, passion for something, but paying attention to those more nuanced power relations. The second key example is more recently about athletes in the AFLW and the relations between gratitude and inclusion. So this is a very different sport context, as there are economic dimensions at play in a different way to community sport. So in community sport, there are still economic dimensions, there are still conflicts of interest, but in AFLW, we know that it is a semi-professional, there's pay involved. So many of the players involved in my research talked about their love of the game, again, that love, and their gratitude for the opportunity. So they said things like, I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to do this. So their generosity is important to note, particularly in community contexts. We know that the generosity of volunteers is what keeps sport organizations running. And I'm a strong advocate for volunteers and the benefits of that. But sometimes there is the risk of exploitation and also the relationships with gratitude. Sometimes this idea that, you know, if I give, that I will receive. So things around the gift, for example. A lot of the players talked about the limits to their gratitude. They wanted to understand why they weren't worth more economically when they were seeing more people watching the sport, more people, going to games with stadiums sold out. So I talk about these limits of gratitude. Also recently, I've talked about the value of women within the AFL. So my work is not just about how can we get more women in sport. That's an important question. But it's more about how do we need to transform sport so that women and gender diverse people, including non-binary people, can feel a sense of belonging in those spaces. it's really hard to belong in sport. I don't know, maybe some people, maybe it's easy for some people, but even for me as a well-educated person, like I'm fit, all of those things, I still find that there is a definite dynamic of inclusion and exclusion within the sport environments that I've been in. And the power dynamics or the politics at play, even at those micro levels, is something that's been ignored for too long, in my opinion, and something that can be worked with in order to change things. Yeah, I guess my main point is that it's not just about having a new policy or, you know, a new organization, but it's about new ways of doing things, I think, and new ways of relating. So I'll stop there and pass on to my colleagues and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Adele. I think it's my turn. Adele, first I'd like to thank you for your leadership of the thematic group in Sociology of Sport and Leisure. I think it's been really good to see sort of it originally emanating sort of nearly 10 years ago from a small group, mainly at Victoria University. And I think co-founder Brent McDonald is with us here in the audience today. And you've really been driving it really strongly the last few years, and that's making a major difference. So thank you. I really, really appreciate that. So my work really sort of frames sport as a setting for understanding a variety of sort of complex social problems. And I'm always interested in how insights and knowledge from sport can enhance our broader sociological understanding of issues around inequalities, discrimination, social change, youth development, forced migration, anti-racism, and so on. So these are just some of the areas that I work with. And then often focusing, having sport sort of as a setting, if you like, but trying to really speak back to broader sociological theory and methodology from the perspective that insights from sport can really speak to, whether it's around embodiment or emotions, inequalities, really have a lot to offer when it comes to sort of sociology more broadly. So today I'll focus for the next sort of couple of minutes on some of the translational work that I've been involved in and some of the audience members here today as well. And that is specifically sort of a suite of projects that we have established that involve action research, working with sports clubs and community partners to, I guess, collaboratively work towards more inclusive, safer, and more welcoming sporting environments. This particular project that is funded by the Federal Department of Health focuses on enhancing opportunities, particularly for multicultural communities in Melbourne's West, and opportunities both in terms of participation, but also at the level of volunteering and positions of leadership, particularly in clubs. So you can see on the screen a number of the partners that we work with, and I'll single out particularly welcoming Australia because we have Maia Tua-Davidson, so our partner investigator and leading practitioner in this space with us. And Maia will be up soon. And so where this comes from is sort of a series of projects that I've been involved in, including 2 ASC linkage projects that examine diversity and inclusion in community sports and really highlighted the lack of sort of critical assessment and action towards changing club cultures or club environments in a more holistic way to really try to, well, more, I guess, in a systems-based way, if you want to call it that. Also, what we found was a real need amongst local practitioners, sometimes called diversity champions, those who are really strong advocates and allies in this space, that felt that there wasn't really a platform or a community of practice where they could share and lean into and be supported by each other. And where also clubs can learn from each other, so in a collaborative kind of paradigm rather than a more competitive paradigm where they're all sort of competing for increasing membership. So how can we really create a space to have more sharing of local knowledge, practices, and particularly also for academic and practitioner collaboration? So from sort of our core team, so Brent McDonald, who's I think he's here today, Fiona McLaughlin, Carla Luguetti, myself, and a range of students. Really coming from this idea of hey, an opportunity here to really practice public sociology and to really say, okay, how can we actually now apply all of that sociological knowledge and education that we've been applying in the classroom or in the academic space? How can we work with policymakers and practitioners to actually put this into action and make change happen? So this is sort of one of the projects that we're working on. In this particular one, we've been working with a number of leaders and volunteers from sports clubs over more than 2 years now, where we assist them in building sort of their skills and knowledge around inclusion and addressing inequalities, developing practical tools to assess their own club climates, and then helping them develop, implement, and evaluate strategies and actions towards addressing some of the gaps and the needs, particularly where it involves hostile elements of their climates. And I'm happy in the discussion to elaborate a bit on that. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll hand over to Associate Professor Karen Block.
Sorry, I just lost my unmute button there for a minute. Thanks very much, Ramon and Adele. And a lot of my work, it covers very much the same kind of areas that Ramon's does. I'm also doing action research in Melbourne focused on inclusion of people, particularly from migrant and refugee backgrounds. I'm based at the University of Melbourne. However, I came to working in sport from a different direction, I guess. My PhD looked at issues of inclusion and exclusion for recently arrived young people from refugee backgrounds, and across a range of settings. It was actually undertaken in education settings. But sport came up again and again as something that young people from those backgrounds who were recently arrived very much wanted to be part of in Australia, but felt that the barriers for them getting involved in sport were really quite insurmountable. They particularly were keen to be involved in clubs. They saw that as a way to meet more people and to be really a part of Australian society, given particularly how much we talk about sport in this country. It's a really important part of Australian identity, I guess. So the barriers are pretty well documented. They're around costs, they're around transport. Sometimes there's gendered barriers as well to getting involved. But particularly what came out of some of my early research in this space was that people just didn't know how the whole club system worked, how to actually go about getting involved. And then if they did venture into a sporting club, they certainly weren't assured of being made to feel welcome or even acknowledged, and that, they didn't understand necessarily how the unspoken rules that many of us take for granted worked. So this has led to two biggish projects that I've done that are both participatory action research projects. The first of these was called Count Me In, and that was about increasing participation by migrant and refugee young people and their families in local clubs in Melbourne's north. So we worked in the Hume and Moreland areas, and we had partnerships with a whole range of sports clubs and other local organisations, and we employed bicultural, bilingual community sports coordinators who worked with families to recruit them, spruik the benefits of sport for their children, link them into clubs, actually, help them with the registration process, and help them with any kind of unexpected things that came up along the way. And we had a really great response in that project. We had over 300 people, 300 kids started playing sport from migrant and refugee backgrounds who had not been previously been playing sport. And one of the most exciting things that came out of it that wasn't something we intended was that a lot of the mothers, who are mostly Muslim, began playing, were keen to be involved as well. And so we set up a badminton program that over time evolved into them actually setting up their own badminton club. And I guess what was really interesting in this project, and I would very much see sport as a microcosm that reflects broader society, was that some of the outcomes reported by our participants were that by getting involved in sport and feeling a part of a club, they felt actually more part of Australian society as a whole. So they developed broader social networks. For example, many of the kids that we worked with went to Islamic schools, and they didn't really associate, until they joined a sports club, didn't really associate with anyone outside their own ethnic community. But that really helped them to develop broader relationships. And for a lot of the women and the mothers actually involved in particular, they reported their involvement as being quite transformative. So some really great outcomes from that project. However, we did have some challenges as well, and particularly challenges around experiences of racism. And sometimes it was rarely overt racism. Often it was more exclusion based on people's culture, religion, or race. And one of the examples I often tell people was one of the clubs that we worked with, and we had brought about 20 young Muslim kids into the club, and they were taking part in their Friday program. And they used to hold a sausage sizzle after training, but they refused to include halal sausages. So none of the Muslim kids that we had brought into the club were able to actually be part of the sausage sizzle. And even when we pointed out that this was a problem and offered to help them source halal sausages, they didn't want to make that change. So that's something I would describe as very much systemic racism, or as Islamophobia in this case. So out of that project, we then developed our next project called STARS, which stands for Standing Together Against Racism in Sport. And we've also partnered with Maia from Welcoming Clubs, who is a really important partner on that project. We've worked, and what happens in that project is we worked with a number of clubs to actually deliver training, or Maia delivers the training in active inclusion and upstander actions against racism. It's been a really interesting project. We're in the process of analysing findings from a survey that we did around racial literacy, and also interviews that we've done with people who've been part of that. It's been challenging to get people to show up for the training, and we're hoping to get some further funding to refine the processes for doing that in the future, because one of the main things we've heard from people is that it's such an important conversation that needs to be ongoing, that racism in all its forms, systemic, interpersonal, and also symbolic racism, which involves racial stereotyping, are really embedded in sport as they are across our society, and that it's something we need to keep talking about as time goes on. So those are the two projects I've been doing in that space. I haven't got it on the slide, but I've also recently just started working on a project looking at women's gendered barriers to women's participation in surfing, and that's very much taking a lens around spatial justice. So even though that's not a club environment, there are very, very many unwritten rules and microaggressions that happen in public space that act to exclude people on the basis of gender and, of course, race and religion as well. So that's a project that's just kicking off now. So I'll stop there and I'll hand over to Maia, who's we're really, really grateful that Maia could be with us today. I'll get your slide up.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Ramon and Adele, for your contributions. My name's Maia. I'm the manager of Welcoming Clubs for a small not-for-profit called Welcoming Australia. Before this role, I was a PE teacher, also been a rugby participation officer, and generally based my life around sport. I've been very privileged in that sense. So Welcoming Australia, in 2016, we started a program called Welcome to the Game, which was working specifically with children, young people and families who'd come to Australia on a humanitarian visa to help them access sport and recreation as a way of connecting out in their communities. I did that for a year. It was very hands-on, very grassroots in terms of me actually working with the families, helping them get boots, helping them do registrations, physically taking them to clubs. And it just wasn't a sustainable model, because essentially as soon as I stepped out of that role, the club hadn't actually built any relationship with those families, and it wasn't a sustainable participation. So after a couple of years of doing that, we kind of moved our focus to support clubs to do that for themselves. A lot of clubs were really positive in the sense that they wanted to. Their greatest fears really were getting it wrong or just not knowing what to do or where to start. So we, at the start of COVID, we started developing a Welcoming Clubs national standard that's based on the Welcoming Cities National Standard, which is another part of our organisation that works with councils. That's kind of a framework where anybody that wants to start doing work in this space, particularly community sports clubs, can actually go on and get a better understanding of where they are as a starting point. There's a benchmarking tool, and then pick really specific things that they might be able to do to progress, to be more welcoming and inclusive. And a lot of that is based on the research of Ramon and Karen and people that have done all this in the space. They say that I'm industry favorite of theirs, but really I'm just smart enough to not try and do these things for myself, because I know that there's other people that are better experts. So I think over time, Welcoming Clubs, we've evolved quite significantly. We have a program in Victoria called Welcome to the Game, which is funded by the Department of Social Services, and that looks specifically at young people and families from diverse backgrounds, but also living with a disability, to help them access sport and recreation. So I really target cohort, really labour intensive but enormously rewarding. That program we have in Melbourne. We also have the Active Inclusion Project, which is the anti-racism work that ties in with both Ramon's Changemakers and Karen's STARS project. So I'm in Queensland, and the concept of active inclusion came from resistance to the term cultural competence for sporting clubs up here. Basically, clubs weren't interested because they felt they felt that we were telling them that they were incompetent before we even started having the conversation. So the concept behind active inclusion is cultural competence in disguise, really. And we talk about things like bias and privilege and those types of things. And then there is the really specific anti-racism and upstander element as well, which the project with STARS last year, like, we got really good momentum off the back of that. And it's always unfortunate that those projects end the way that they do. Another thing that we do is we work a lot with community organisations. An example, another Melbourne one, Fitzroy Lions, which is in the housing towers, as a soccer club that has started organically, and we've just helped them kind of build their governance and organisational arm to support their development. We also have an online inclusion hub where clubs, if they want to, they can actually apply to become an accredited welcoming club by measuring themselves against the standard and building that evidence base with what they've actually been doing. And more recently, we've kind of been pushing a little bit into sport for healing, or trauma-informed sports coaching. And I think that that will continue to be a focus. It's something that we're really passionate about as staff within the organisation. Mind-blowing once you kind of get into how the brain works. And I think I also have a different perspective in the sporting space. I'm a coach in the Queensland Premiership Women's Rugby League competition. And I coach a team called South Logan Magpies. If anyone knows Logan, it's demographically similar to Wyndham in Victoria. My team is 90% Pacific Island Māori or Indigenous, but we're in a club that's over 100 years old with a demographic of affluent, predominantly white part of Brisbane. So a really interesting dynamic. And when Adele was talking about things like the gender and the power dynamics, there's a lot going on that limits the participation, or the full participation of my athletes and women in general in that sport. And aside from that, I'm also on 2 sporting club committees. So one is a Taiwhanaka Youth Academy, which is a Māori performing arts and rugby sevens club. And the other one is the Queensland Pacific Island Cultural Carnival. And we run a massive rugby league tournament every year for all the Pacific Island communities up here in Queensland. So kind of sit across a lot of things. And I think in relation to this conversation today, I probably, when I started this, would go to a conference and sit there and go, how is what these academics are talking about of any use to me? Like, I'm on the ground, I'm talking to these families, their information doesn't help me have these conversations with the clubs. And I think over time, I've completely flipped that. Like, it's so important that we use the data and the information that's been presented, because it is often quite different to what we're seeing and what we're feeling, but equally important.
Thank you, Maia. Karen, shall we? Yeah, that's it. Yay. To see everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much, Adele, Maia, and Karen, for your introductions. Now, I'm a bit conscious of the time, so we might have to sort of improvise a little bit. So before opening up to the audience, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion, that people can bring in some of the issues and expertise, you know, that they want to sort of weave into this conversation. But before we do that, I might just start with having one question to each panelist, if that's okay. So we'll and then we'll see how we go. We'll open it up and see if we have time. I might always sneak in a few more. And I'll start with Adele. But the question is kind of to all three. And the background here is that there's sort of a growing interest in or attention for the utilization and impact of research. So particularly this research engagement and impact agenda. And obviously something that sociologists, social scientists more broadly, are also starting to come to terms with. So actually, TASA's flagship journal, the Journal of Sociology, actually published some research a few years ago done by Adrian Cherney and Tara McKee around the utilization of sociological research, and also around what are some of the barriers and enablers, I guess, to academic practitioner collaboration. So I'm really interested, particularly in your particular ways, and you're working in quite different contexts. To start with Adele. So Adele, how have you sought to share, mobilize, or I guess use or adapt your research to sort of contribute to that kind of real world impact, if you want to call it that, in the communities or with the stakeholders that you've engaged with?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been so determined to try and do this, though I'm not sure how, because I also really believe that we can't have reductionist approaches. So to me, it's a really fine balance. One of the things that I have done is doing kind of open events. So in, I think it was 2018, 2019, and 2020, and then we had COVID. I was hosting these women in sports symposiums and trying to invite really diverse people, academics and industry working in sport, to have these really rich, productive conversations. And they were just so wonderful, because it meant that the inclusion and diversity officer at judo, or, you know, just people who didn't have a community where they could reflect and talk about these things, started to have that community. And it was just, yeah, it was really exciting. You know, people in motorsports, and, you know, they're in male-dominated environments, and they're not getting to really share or have a voice, you know. And I remember someone emailed me afterwards and said, oh my God, it's like the voice inside my head was outside talking to me, you know, because they've been thinking it and they just, you know, had that. So that was a key way. I also host the research seminar series. But yeah, finding time to do impact work within a balanced profile of an academic is actually really burning me out, to be honest, because I'm a very community engaged person. But I also know I have to, you know, do my teaching and all those things. So I would like to be able to partner with more organizations and do the work and have the conversations. And yeah, I think it's a long-term thing. In my latest ARC grant, we have included a budget and research design of recruiting researcher participants. So there'll be a small group that will kind of come along the whole 3-year journey with us. So people who are women, girls, and non-binary people who are either, you know, experience of disability or cold backgrounds or some kind of diversity. We don't want to just end up with kind of white women again in our as our focus. And yeah, to build their capacity to understand what research is and how they can engage with it and how it might help their communities get involved in the 2032 legacies. So yeah, always thinking about how to connect things and how to do this, but yeah, but also with that really strong emphasis that yeah, we can't always do what we've always done and fall into those reductionist approaches.
Yeah, thank you. That's yeah, totally agree. Karen, just to sort of build on that, like you've already talked a little bit about the translational work you do, including with welcoming clubs. What for you have been some of the key enablers or mechanisms that you feel have been quite effective in? Have you found particular strategies of creating that kind of impact with community and partners?
Yeah, I think the most important thing really are partnerships, community partners. So bringing people along the journey with you, and I hope that can kind of help create some sustainable change. I think one of the most difficult things is the kind of research funding cycle. So you build on you build on previous evidence. You set up. Basically the last couple of projects we've done have been around testing a model, I guess, and seeing what the outcomes are. And then you really would love to be able to just keep doing that and refining it and scaling it up. But it's really hard to take that next step. You publish those findings, people get very interested, but it's very, I haven't yet cracked that, that nut of how do you actually, scale that up so that those changes that you've been able to create at a local level can be spread more widely. And one of the things that we've just put in for more funding, and if we get it, we would like to do with the STARS project is try a train the trainer kind of approach, so that some of the lessons that we've learned and work that we're doing with clubs, we can spread that out. So it's not just, we don't have to bring Maia down from Brisbane, wonderful as that is, every time we wanted to do training with a club, but to kind of have more people putting those messages out there. But yeah, partnering with community organisations, partnering with clubs, working in a participatory way with people from the communities that you're wanting to work with. I think all of those are absolutely key to achieving anything at all.
Maia, you having been working with academics such as Karen and myself, what is your perspective to this, and has that changed over time as you've become more familiar with those collaborations?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely changed over time. I think quite small team within the Welcoming Clubs initiative as well, just 4 people. So really for us, it was about sharing resources. Like we're very grassroots. We're very much about having conversations with clubs and people on the ground. That's where we believe the greatest impact is, in terms of someone walking into the club for the first time and feeling safe and welcome and included. That's our area of expertise. And I think working with yourself and Karen and universities and having it gives us a little bit of credibility as well, to be perfectly honest, in the sector. But really it's about us staying in our lane and staying specialists in what we believe we are, and allowing other people to do that. And I think the sporting sector's probably not very good at that. They want to be experts at everything because it's around branding and all those kinds of things. So I think allowing other people to be experts and just having that reciprocal relationship where we know that we're all working for the same purpose and the same outcomes. And I think having that values alignment from the start and making sure that that's a priority when we're building the relationship is really beneficial.
Right, thank you. Kind of inclined to open it up to the audience, and we can always circle back around some more panel questions, but let's really utilize this amazing intellectual capital that I see here on my screen, with and without camera. So anyone feel free to either raise your hand or come off mute, and yeah, we look forward to your contributions.
Thanks. Thanks everyone. This is a really important area, and I know how hard it is from both sides. I think for the academics and people beyond university to try and meet in this space and interact productively. I suppose I've just got a broad sociological question about the institution of sport and what precisely is that it is that we're seeking to attract people into this specific form of physical culture with its historical lineage, baggage, you might say. Quite a lot of it unbecoming, worrying. And also a specific form of physical culture that involves regulation and competition and that sort of thing, which is say, different from the broader field of physical activity, non-competitive physical activity. So I suppose it's a sociological question about what really is it about sport that, from your point of view, leads it as a particularly useful vehicle for the kinds of social inclusion projects that you're all involved in?
I'm happy to jump in first. If I, so I sit in at school population and global health. So some of the things that we've looked at in our projects is the health impacts of sport. And, you know, at its best, I think it can be really powerful, you know, in our Count Me In project, and we're just in the process of publishing some more results from that. You know, we saw measurable increases in resilience amongst young people over the period of time that they were involved in sport. We certainly had a lot of qualitative evidence for both physical and mental health benefits. And we also measured people's social networks, and we could see that they became broader and larger. And linking that to social capital theory, you know, you would see that, I would see that as a real benefit as well. I mean, obviously, as you say, there's all sorts of dark sides of sport, you know, the competitive aspect, the microaggressions, the way people can be excluded. But certainly across our cohort in that study, the Count Me In study, we were able to measure and see some real benefits. So I think there are, you know, and I guess those of us who are involved in sport ourselves have, you know, there's a reason why we do it. We do it because we get those kinds of things out of it too. But yeah, I'm sure other people in the panel would have something to add to that.
Adele or Maia, did you want to add to that?
I'm happy to say something because I've been thinking, you know, I think about sport a lot because of all the emphasis on elite sport and Olympianism, amateurism, professionalism, all these things. And then I've been, you know, reading within posthumanism and trying to think about sociology and new theories. And one of the things that sport provides is that suspension of time, like, you know, when you're playing sport, it's not about, you know, it's not, even though it's a human endeavor, you're in the flow. You're not thinking about what's for dinner and all these other things. Like it's a different relationship to space and to the other people in your team and to yourself. So I ask, like, who gets access to that experience in society? You know, for a lot of history, it's only been those, you know, men and those with the economic means to be able to train and commit time to having that experience. So yeah, thinking about who gets that, who is sport for, and what is it for? Yeah, having that decentered experience, you know, that it's the human is decentered from that, and that there are, because, you know, you can get injured, right? So it's not all good. You know, you might be having this great health, and then you get injured. And like I said before, belonging, that's really fragile and really depends on a lot of things. But yeah, thinking about that experience of being in the flow and who gets access to that is something that I think maybe is a good question to ask.
Maia, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, not from an academic perspective, but I do think quite deeply about these things and about the, you know, what has been successful in the environments that I've been in. And I think I kind of break it down to that, like, at its core, tribalism. We all in a tribe, that gives us belonging, and then that gives us protection. And that's kind of how I see club sport, is when we become part of something, we're protected from the rest of the world in some regard, and that tribalism element of us against them that's the foundation of sport, really, is we're going to beat them or they're going to beat us. So I think that's kind of what sticks out to me in terms of what makes it so powerful. And I think, you know, that tribalism can be a very, very good thing, but it also can be a very, very bad thing at the same time.
Yeah, I was just going to add, these are really valuable comments. David, just had a couple of sort of observations. So first of all, is that almost constrictive mode of the institution of mainstream sport is itself kind of, the boundaries are porous, it's constantly in flux. Just thinking of a number of research projects that are currently going on around sort of informal sport, self-organized sport, and so that itself is kind of contested, which I think is really nice to see. David, it's actually a really interesting question, because I ultimately struggle, for example, around when I look at sort of lived experience and sort of apply that micro-sociological lens around. Recently I've been studying sort of, the flow of emotional energy or collective effervescence in a maybe Durkheimian way. I always think back of one project I was doing with young people who sort of recently arrived, migrant backgrounds, who were really struggling in school, where they felt, well, they couldn't articulate it that way, but really they felt they lacked sort of the cultural capital, yeah? So they were really marginalized, and that the school system really reproduced their marginality. Yet when they were playing, whether it's basketball, soccer, or whoever, depending on sort of the person, they experienced that sense of the accumulation of bodily capital and being someone, and a sense of belonging on that court, right? Now, that was quite powerful, almost as, if you like, whether a buffer or an act of resistance, or actually developing the kind of things that Karen was referring to earlier around belonging, social connectedness. Yet, obviously, I'm then quite interested in okay, how does the micro here relate to the macro? And is this ultimately potentially self-defeating, in the sense that it might feel empowering at the micro level, but ultimately what it does is keep certain, particularly young people, but more certain population groups in their place, right? Is it ultimately reproducing inequalities? Or is it potentially transformational? And if so, how, right? And how does that micro potentially translate back into sort of more collective forms of action, solidarity, and ultimately social change? And that's probably something I'll be trying to work out for a lot longer, and many people after me probably. So it really raises some really fundamental questions, David, what you're raising there. Yeah, thanks. Any other comments, questions, critiques? All welcome. Jack?
Thanks everyone for the discussion. I'm wondering about, and I think it's particularly relevant to Adele's work, but maybe others as well. I'm wondering about the understanding of emotions in sports spaces, and any reflections, particularly around love and suffering, and reflecting on the common theoretical approaches and concepts used. It seemed as something, quite irrational, excessive about, thinking about sport fandom, and thinking about, just experiences of sport. And so I'm wondering about how social theories grapple with that irrationality in particular.
Yeah, I think that's, because it's funny, like sport is one area where we've always talked about those passions, or, the quest for excitement is, text that most of us know within the sociology of sport. But I think that feminist theories are really productive in this space, because it's challenging those binaries, so generally women have been thought of as unruly, emotional, hysterical throughout history, and feminist theory works to trouble these binaries between the mind and the body. And that's something, part of my broader intellectual project, if I ever get any time to think, is around troubling that mind-body split. And sport is the most exciting place to do that, because it has on one hand this kind of rational sport business, sports science, we're very rational, we're using numbers. On the other hand, we know that the body is central, and it is a place of passions and sweat and exertion and injury. So yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting things that, not just relevant to sport, but relevant more broadly in terms of relationships that we can expand on. But yeah, a lot of the feminist work, Elspeth Gross, and some of the new materialist work, just thinking about power differently, not something as a rational kind of authority down on one. There is always these relationships between people and objects and spaces. But we could talk another time. There's much to say, but other people have things too.
Karen or Maia, would you like to comment on that, even from a sort of more experiential perspective, or not?
Yeah, I think because sport is a microcosm really of the broader society, you know, just about any social theory that you're working with can probably be applied. I mean, one of the things I've been looking at in the context of racism in sport and anti-racism in sport is around, you know, structural and symbolic violence and how that plays out through sport. And I guess I would hope that what we learn in sport, you can then apply more broadly. And speaking to Ramon's point before, and I think that's such an important one about, you know, how does what goes on in sport, you know, does it have potential to transform society more broadly? And like Ramon, you know, that's something that I grapple with too, and would love to spend more time with, if I ever have any time, thinking about that. So yeah, those are some of the theories that I guess I'm using at the moment, but I think there's many, and feminist theories as well, definitely, around power in particular.
Yeah, I was going to add, Jack, it's a really pertinent question, because I often get asked sort of by colleagues, particularly, you know, the work I was doing at the University of Amsterdam in the Sociological department. I was like the only person doing anything with sport or leisure. And they were really interested. So I had an expert there in sociology of emotions and the body. And, you know, can you come and give a talk? Because we have to address sport, right? They actually see it as really fundamental. So whether it's around what Kant calls carnal sociology, that sociology of flesh and blood, you know, then you look at ethnographies of boxing or capoeira, and many other. I'm just, you know, it's not an exhaustive list. More recent work that I've sort of really drawn as well, the work by Randall Collins, really sort of the rituals of emotional energy, and really trying to bring emotions front and center. Randall Collins actually gave a keynote at the European Association of Sociology of Sport, I think about 8 years ago, where he actually argued that, hey, you know, there's so much we as in mainstream sociologists can learn from sport and help us theorize around emotions and the body in very rich ways. So it's the point's very well taken. And I think there's a real challenge there to keep sort of informing or speaking to kind of these broader debates. And I think historically, for example, Chris Schilling around the body and social theory has done a really good work there, for example, looking at how the work of Norbert Elias, but also Pierre Bourdieu sort of really informs that. And then, you know, through to the feminist work that Adele sort of just mentioned. So I think it's a real rich opportunity here. So, Jack, maybe it's also a call to action, or a call to create more time for thinking before action, I guess. All right, we have time for a couple more questions, so keep them coming. None at this point. Take our time. Maybe feel free at any point to sort of jump in. Roger, did you want to jump in with a question?
Yes.
Dorch as well.
My question was to Maia. I wonder if you might just give a bit of a brief, talk a bit briefly about the national standards that you were developing, and just even just a few dot points perhaps for welcoming clubs.
Yeah, sure. So the national standard has 6 categories: leadership, community engagement, social and cultural inclusion, recruitment and retention, and money. 5 categories. And within those, it's all informed by the experiences of the communities I worked with in those first couple of years in terms of what they told us. made them feel welcome and included. And then we also had a senior data analysis, Dr. John Van Coy, that kind of refined that for us to make sure it aligned with research in the area. But basically clubs can go in and there's different levels. So there's things like we have an acknowledgement of traditional owners, or we have relationships with the local traditional owners. And if they're doing that, they get points for that, and there's levels of what's more difficult. So for leadership, that's a level 1 that's really reasonably easy to implement at leadership level, and then a level 3 would be something like hosting opportunities for your club to learn more about anti-racism and embedding reporting tools. And then the clubs get a score after the 6 categories, pumps them out, tells them what level that they're at, and then they can actually use that and drag the different parts over into a diversity and inclusion action plan. And the purpose of that really is this kind of stuff at a community sporting club lies with one person who's really passionate about it. And the idea with that is actually gives them something tangible that they can take back to the committee and say, you know what, we're actually really good at this and we're really good at this, but this is some things that we could focus on moving forward. And this is a really easy plan that I think that we could use. I'm happy to send that through as well and share it.
Thank you, Maia. I'll pass over to Doortje. So I hope I don't butcher that with my Dutch native tongue.
That was great. Thanks. Yeah, I just have a question, because my own field of research is in women in sailing, which is also a very man-dominated sport. And I also see a lot of these microaggressions that you've been talking about. And as you also have some success stories, I was just wondering, because microaggressions are so hard to change and there's so many layers of complexity to them, like where do you see opportunities? What do they look like? And also maybe a bit more theoretical, like what kind of environment is necessary to allow for these opportunities? So it's a question to everyone, basically.
I can't remember who first referred to microaggressions. Would have been Karen or Adele, probably. I don't know if either of you would like to kick off.
Just quickly, because we don't have much time, but I think that kind of mashing up some of the things and the ways that we think sport environments should look like, I mean, you know, bringing poetry into a sports club, or trying to bring creative or elements from music. I just think that we can't just put in a policy or put more women in leadership. Like, it's not just about kind of replacing what is already there, but trying to transform the environment. That's just a very quick answer. That I think that, yeah, it really is about thinking beyond just a rational, linear approach to change.
I'll just add something really quickly. Yeah, it's a great question, Doortje. I think you know, your work in sailing probably overlaps a lot with the project we're about to do with women in surfing. And you know, one of the things that just from preliminary discussions that people bring up all the time is just, you know, start with everything. Start with the language, with the imagery. You know, in surfing, for example, you know, you've got often imagery will show the men doing athletic things on a board and the women looking good on the beach. You know, it's all about, you know, I guess taking that lens to every single thing that surrounds the sport, and I guess exposing it first before you can change it. I think understanding people's experiences. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for research in this space, because I think a lot of these conversations haven't even been had much to date. But ultimately, again, it's that whole problem, isn't it, of you know, sport just reflecting the broader world. We live in a patriarchal society, effectively, and it's hard to change sport on its own unless you can have broader change as well. But I think, you know, that we're all chipping away at our own little bits of it with the work that we do.
Maia, any final comments from you, or satisfied with what's been shared?
No, I think from a from a practice perspective of when we're actually having these conversations in community, people don't even know what that means. So that's really important to start off with. And we've had a workshop we did with the athletics club with Karen. We had two people sitting in the room, one an older generational man, and we were talking about microaggressions, saying, no, they just need to be more resilient. They need to harden up. I had to put up with this. And then a younger person in the room saying, no, that's not okay. We don't accept that. So actually being really having and allowing the dialogue that has to go with that as well. Like, people have to be heard. That man very much had to be heard in that. Otherwise, he's going to go away feeling even more ingrained in what he felt before. But I would say from a practice perspective is people don't even know what that is. And we always use the death by 1,000 cuts analogy, but I would say, 95% of the racism that we talk about and that we see in these spaces, it is microaggressions. It is that covert stuff.
Thank you. So it is 1:30. David, last word is yours.
Sorry, yes, just very quickly, just said to Adele, any chance of advertising our event on July the 28th before we go?
So just quickly, I'll put it into the LinkedIn group, but July 28th, save the date, more information to come. We are hosting the Taza Sport and Leisure Group together with Griffith University, are co-hosting a Women's World Cup event focusing on the social-cultural dimensions. We have wonderfully have Tracy Holmes secured as our opening guest speaker, who will do some remarks. And there will be an open call for panels as well. So July 28th, there's no games on that date. So you can come and enjoy. And then there's France versus Brazil. I think it is the day after. Get your tickets. All the Australian games are sold out, unfortunately. So yeah, but that will be really, really exciting to have, all our wonderful expertise being able to speak on this huge event that's coming to Australia.
Thank you, Adele. It sounds very exciting. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Thank Taza, particularly Sally and Roger, and also the other speakers today, Adele, Karen, and Maia, for your contributions. And yeah, please do stay in touch. We have that wonderful event. We obviously, towards the end of the year, we have the Taza conference, and we have ISA, of course, the World Congress of Sociology coming to Melbourne. Yay! So grab your registrations, because I've been receiving several reminders. So I think it's due soon. Yeah, we do really look forward to seeing you all there and to continuing this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.